Good afternoon, members, and welcome to the Social Work Services Committee of Monday, 7th of June 2021. We're holding this meeting online, and I'll just confirm at the start my approval as chair for members' remote participation in the meeting. Could I get a note of the sederant and apologies, please, Tracy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. We've currently got 13 members present. I have apologies from Councillor Tate, and not present at the start are Councillor Karen Crothers, Councillor Charteris, Councillor Giusti, Councillor Inglis, Councillor Murray, Councillor Sloan and Councillor Wood. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. I had a note from Councillor McClellan, but I see he's on the call because I knew he was maybe going to have potential issues. Councillor Lever?
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Murray's having problems connecting. She's still trying.
Thanks for that. We can note that, and my sort of MC skills aren't great, so I'll maybe preamble a bit to allow people the opportunity to join. Obviously, as the meeting goes on, the good practice now is to turn off your mic if you're not speaking, and also your video to help with the bandwidth for those members with connection issues. But if you do have a question to ask, if you put it in the Teams chat function, and then that way I've got a very good chance of seeing that. If you put your hand up, hopefully Tracy will be able to help, because I can't see all the members on screen all at one time, so that would be helpful, thank you. And I see Councillor Murray has actually written something in the chat there, just highlighting her connection issues, so hopefully that can get resolved. Do we have any declarations of interest for today's committee? I'll take that as a no. And if we move on to item 3, which is the minute of the previous meeting of 11th of May, this is for approval. Are we happy to approve the minute?
Happy to approve, Chair.
Thank you. That takes us on to item 4, which is the development of the single access point. And this is a report by Chief Social Work Officer. You'll have had a chance to look at the report, hopefully, and I'm sure Lillian's here to speak to this and take us through it. Obviously, we're being asked effectively today to make the request based on the case in front of us to the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee for the allocation of much needed resources in terms of how we get through recovery. So with that, I'll hand over to Lillian to speak to the report before opening up to members.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I would ask Heather to pick up any specifics from this report, as Heather has been the officer responsible for the implementation and the development of the single access point team. Hopefully members, we've given you the detail around the history and the background, and at this point I would ask Heather just to give a very brief overview, and then we'll take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Lillian. Over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I suppose what we've tried to do in the report is to give you a fairly detailed overview of the development of the SAP so far, the single access point so far. And I suppose one of the key things would be just to note that it's come from our learning from COVID, in terms of the development of a slightly different way of working, a more integrated way of working, and a way of working that allowed us to join things up in a more cohesive way than previously. And I think there's a really clear commitment that we don't want to lose that. So we're looking to try and find a way to do that. Now, what we're hoping is that this specific request will help cover us for the additional resources that we did have from across the council, which have been really invaluable in helping us getting this far. And that therefore for a period of 12 to 18 months, we can then look more closely at the transformation required in terms of taking us forward beyond that. But other than that, then I have nothing else specific to add, and yes, more than happy to take any questions you might have.
Chair, I wonder, just before we open this up, could I just make a point of clarity?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Heather. Members, we are looking to request 18 months funding. However, We are acutely aware that the Financial Procurement and Transformation Committee will have other asks, so we have looked to provide members with the information that would cost between 12 or 18 months. But just a point of clarity from the service point of view, we would be looking for 18 months as the recommendation to take forward to the FPT committee. Thank you, Chair.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Lillian. And it's, I suppose, in recommendation 2.2, which we'll come to, it does set that out, and I think it's actually helpful in the papers to see clearly what the cost implications are for both those periods. But as you say, and I think part of the reason why we're having this meeting is to make sure we're following the proper sort of governance framework, if you like, is that we make the recommendation as this committee, and Finance Procurement Transformation have in the round with their budget considerations will then take on board our recommendation and the case in front of it to make the final decision, if you like. So with that, I'll open it up to members. Do we have any questions on the report for clarification?
Andy Ferguson, Chair.
Yeah, so well spotted there. I've got Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think we'd be daft not to support this. Okay, I think that's the first point. My only question, though, Lillian or Heather, is what happens at the end of 18 months?
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Ferguson. Heather, do you want to take that in the first instance?
Yes, we're acutely aware, Councillor Ferguson, of the impact beyond the 18 months, and we do want this to be a longer term model, but we need to use the next sort of like 18 months to sort of like look more closely at what that would be, you know, as we're sort of beginning to emerge. And one of the key things we would do would be to have further discussions with our partners, certainly the Health and Social Care Partnership in particular, because of course you'll have seen in the report we're bringing our health colleagues on board. And so one of those core decisions that we need to have is how would we, not just how would we develop the model going forward, but how would we fund any model that was going forward, and how could that reflect then both the council commitment in terms of the social work input to it, but also the commitment from the Health and Social Care Partnership going forward. So those would be sort of where we would go in terms of looking at what it is that we could do in terms of meeting that funding once we were past the 18 months, if we by that stage had developed a valid model that we felt was sustainable and it was a useful way to take forward.
I wonder, Chair, could I just add a point to that if possible?
Yeah, of course, Lillian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Heather. Councillor Ferguson, you'll also be aware of the current review of the National Care Service. So clearly over the next 12 to 18 months, we are in an uncertain period of time of change. And clearly the most important element for us would be to evaluate and show that this model would be the most effective way forward, because there will be changes coming as a consequence of the Feely review and the way forward for the National Care Service, which at this moment in time, we're not sure what pathway that will take, but there will be changes coming to the Health and Social Care Partnership. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ferguson, does that answer your question?
Yes, 99.9%, Stephen. I suppose I'm kind of looking at Heather here for the good old days when we had some funding from Scottish Government a good few years ago now for a very specific purpose, lasted for 3 years, and all we did was we created an expectation that would, and then Lillian had to come along and that then became embedded into the mainstream budget, because once you've made an assessment, you can't undo the assessment, if I think was the quote I had at the time from a senior social worker. So unless, of course, there was a miracle, and we know they don't happen. So I'm just, whilst I'm totally supportive of this direction, I think we just need to be acutely aware as elected members, Stephen, that we don't actually create an expectancy, or so that if this is a way of developing how we're going to look at that new model, then yes, because I'm just also acutely aware that the Health Social Care Partnership, sorry, the IGB, not the partnership, could actually issue directions. And you're quite, the two officers are exactly right, because Feely, for example, could have a major influence in this. So I think it's hugely welcome, but I think has to be a degree of caution here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a fair point, Andy, and I think obviously you've got a bit of background experience as well. But I would say that, I mean, these conversations are not unusual whenever I'm speaking with, when Chair and Vice Chair meet with the Chief Social Work Officer. And I think, given the period of risk that we're in and the sort of level of certainty that we have going forward, as well as where we know the demand is, and even within the report, I think we have to have a single point of access at front of house, if you like, irrespective of the different services operating behind that, whether it's adult care or children and families, or even other parts of the health and social care partnership. So I think it's about developing that model, and I know that there will be partners across the piece that would probably want to see this as part of their tactical approach to how we deal with this. However, we're not there yet, I think is what we're saying, and obviously we don't want to set ourselves up to fail. But I think we still have to address the risk in front of us as well. So there's a bit of a balance being struck in a lot of quarters, I think. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lillian, before I go on to Councillor Maitland for her question.
No, I think that's absolutely correct, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. With that, Councillor Maitland, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Actually, a couple of the points that I was going to make have been touched on, but I want to expand. I'm absolutely with Councillor Ferguson in terms of the sustainability of this money going forward, and how it actually fits into the overall envelope of health and social care. I think maybe when this comes to Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee, there should be some explanation and briefing note put into that to explain the interface between it, because it is a complicated picture. The second thing I wanted to say is about, I would have expected to have had some indication of the risks that this is going to address, and that it should have connected up into, arguably our business plan, and looking at the competing priorities that the Finance Committee will be looking at. I think it would also have been helpful maybe to have seen that at this point here. The third thing is a very specific thing, which is about referrals. These referrals are coming for social work. Will there be any referral from the GPs directly to this? Just a question. And the fourth thing is about the data sharing issue, which I totally welcome, and really do think that this is a great thing to be happening. I think there are huge opportunities here, and I just want to make certain we've grasped them to the best of our ability. The service user, I think, is part and parcel of this, and I just wonder whether we could also have some system whereby the service user was able to get a record to share the data that they have shared with us. I'm thinking of it from the point of view of, say, a carer that goes on to speak to all the authorities, all different people, and it would be so helpful to have, in some ways, a track of the contact that has been made with the various authorities in the past. And so I wonder if that could be thought of and built in. Sorry, there's rather a lot there, Chairman, but it's a very important report.
Thanks, Councillor Maitland. I mean, I think on the first point about risk, and I'll just say this before passing over to Lillian in the first instance, I think, but we have discussed how we report risk and how consistent that is across the service committees, for example. And I know there's a piece of work ongoing just now in terms of governance review, and there's certain things emerging which I think will come back to. We'll come back to audit risk and scrutiny, for example, and then council in terms of where that goes then. But there certainly is a way about how do we capture risk along with performance whenever we're hearing these reports, because obviously we need to, as big a picture as we can get. How that goes forward, I think we'll have to see. But I think I'm sure officers will be aware of that's a piece of work that's coming towards them. In terms of the referrals, I'll obviously pass it over to Lillian and Heather. Data sharing, again, that's maybe something for how we monitor this when we get to 2.3. So obviously, however this goes forward, we would expect to see in the update reports to provide some of the details on how the model's developing, and then what that may or may not include or be feasible to include as we shift towards what it's saying there about the early intervention and how that oversight is passported across the different agencies and partners, if you like, so that nobody at any time people know where they are in the system, if you like. But with that, Lillian, I don't know if you want to pick up those points first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maitland, and then I'm sure Heather will come in with some further information. So absolutely no issue at all providing a briefing note on the linkage with the Health and Social Care Partnership. As you quite rightly say, it's a very complex and cluttered landscape. However, this aspect of health and social care is very much ours to deliver on. So we can certainly provide that if you think that would be helpful, Councillor Maitland. That's not an issue at all. I think we've tried to, for members, raise the areas of risk and tried to address some of the different ways in which we are looking to manage the significant demand of this service, and particularly around the increased referrals, which come from many areas. And yes, I can confirm that GPs can directly make a referral to this service. So there is access for GPs to do that, or for the practice to do that. So that opportunity is absolutely there. The data sharing obviously is a significant development, and I'll certainly let Heather come in on that, Councillor Maitland. I think when you move to providing service users with a certificate or a record of the conversations that had happened, that can be more challenging. It doesn't mean that we can't look at that, but there's a whole range of legislation around how an individual can give authority to share their own data or their data of someone that they have power of attorney or caring responsibilities for. So it's certainly not out with us being able to do that, but that would be a step in the forward direction, if you like, as to how we would do that moving forward. The important thing for us during the development of this process is to make sure that the partnership and the wider partners, the multi-agency partners, are sharing information, because that's really important in someone's care journey. So happy for Heather to come in on anything that I have not covered there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, because Lillian probably has covered most of it really, but in terms of the referrals from GPs, I think one of the key things about where we're at currently is that the state of development in terms of our health colleagues. So the plan, Councillor Maitland, is very much that we move to a position whereby we're able to take referrals from any health professional in terms of the community health and social care aspects, and that will include the GPs. Now, we're currently looking at the specific ways we can do that. We've looked quite specifically at the telephony. We want to make sure that we've got a system in place that, you know, has no abandoned calls, that actually people get through, particularly GPs, get through first off, and there's no delay. So those are the sorts of things we're currently testing. And we've got some health staff with us already, but we would expect that to grow and develop. And I suppose one of the core things here is about we're building it on our existing model, a model which has worked very well. And so we're negotiating around sort of the professional advice, etc., that is required across the wealth of health services that make sure that health calls coming in get to the right place as quickly as possible and get there first time. So that's all part and parcel of the development, hence the need to have those further developments with the partnership and indeed with the IJB. In terms of the data sharing, we are quite excited about this, but I mean, I don't need to tell Councillor Maitland, this can bring as much frustration at times as it can excitement. But we have now got the health staff who are sitting in the single access point on council laptops, so they have access to all our systems, including Mosaic. And we are working with our health colleagues to ensure that they can access all their systems as well. And our logic, and I'm not technical in this, but I've been assured by my technical colleagues that the logic then would be that in working in Mosaic, the health staff are able to take the information required there, put it into the health system, because they will also have access to that. And we should, in theory, be able to streamline this much more than we've ever done before. And I'm also working on the logic, if we can do it our way round, then I can't see why then we couldn't then be looking and saying, okay, well, we can manage this, then can we then turn that on its head and manage it from the other way in? The other bit, and I think Lillian has covered really clearly the bit about the complexities of information for service users. However, in terms of the move to digital for the council, I think there will be some opportunities through what I understand is called the My Account system that will allow sort of like, from our perspective, service users, from the council's perspective, it would be customers, etc., and residents, to actually be able to access some level of their record. Now, from ours, it would probably be fairly specific, but it certainly gives us the opportunity to begin to think about what the possibilities are there, and therefore to look at that going forward. But we would have to be tempered, as Lillian says, by the sort of the complexities of that one in terms of getting ourselves to, you know, the full and proper and legal conclusion on it, really.
Thanks, Heather. Councillor Maitland, does that help address your concerns?
Well, it's certainly very helpful. I mean, there's such a long way to go, but gosh, yes, data sharing. We've got it all tattooed on our backside, haven't we, from years ago? Well,
it's slow progress, but I think we are getting somewhere. I know obviously there is an action within what's been said there in terms of that briefing note for the linkages with Health and Social Care Partnership. So if we can just capture that as well, obviously that'd be helpful for all members of the committee. So we've got Councillor Diggy Campbell to speak next.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at the graph on page 15 now. To be honest, I'm not very good when it comes to interpreting graphs, so this is possibly a question that is obvious. But the increase in calls is quite astonishing. But they only appear to take us up to February of this year. And my question would be, how does that line look from February to the current time? Is it following a similar trajectory, or has there been any sort of increase in call demand over the last few months due to lockdown starting to ease?
Just before I get an answer to that, Diggy, there is another interesting feature about that graph, which is if you look at the 19 to 20 figure, really there should be, I would say, a figure for March, and at the end of that blue line at the bottom, that would probably show either a spike, because, well, we all know what happened in March 2020, and similarly at the start of the line at the top for 2021, that should start basically at the same point, you know, of the year before, and that would kind of join up the narrative, if you like. But in terms of, and obviously there's a big increase, and the causes are well known, but just in terms of Councillor Diggy Campbell's point there, Lillian, would that be you in the first instance, or Heather as a specialist?
Well, Heather is a specialist, of course, but what I can confirm, Councillor Campbell, is that the increase is continuing. So we certainly had some recent figures, which I'll let Heather share. I think just last week we had double numbers, but I'll let Heather come in with the exact detail. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thank you for spotting the sort of the stage of which our development of data is in relation to the single access point. I think in terms of the increase, yes, absolutely. The figure is still much higher than it was. There has been some decrease. If you think about the line we're showing you, it covers all of the stuff coming into the single access point, which is your all social work referrals. It also calls all what were shielding, and although shielding itself has been stopped and paused and is now slightly different than it was before, we're continuing to take a number of those calls because of the level of anxiety. So we anticipate that those numbers will remain at quite a sort of a stark difference, but there has been a sort of a slower turn off on some of that, although I have to say last week we've seen another increase, and certainly in terms of our out of hours work, which links into this, although it's not part of it, but you can see the linkage is double last week. But in terms of the single access point, we had a huge increase. We've been taking the test and protect support calls, and they had reduced quite considerably. And actually they're back up again, because there are more people who have been asked to isolate, etc. So we're continuing to feel those sort of things as well. So I think I've tried to say somewhere in the report, we do anticipate this figure coming down slightly, but we don't anticipate coming down to the previous level. And that will reflect the overall increased demand across the service. So it will stay up, but it will probably just still consider, it's a very slight dip starting in the February figure for the 2020-21 one, and you're probably going to see that when you get those full figures of just continuing that trend a little bit, and then you'll probably see a couple of wee spikes coming up. And I think we're hoping maybe within 6 months, certainly 12 at the most, but certainly within 6, maybe to see a much clearer picture of what we think the trend will be. That's barring any other major changes, etc. So we are keeping a really close eye on that. Because it's really important that we understand that, not least in terms of how we resource and how we continue to develop this model.
Thanks, Heather. And Diggy, Campbell, does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. That's very helpful, Heather and Lillian. It's clearly a very complex environment, but it's reassuring to know that it's been monitored in terms of the depth that it has been given. Thanks very much. Okay, thank you. I can't see any other hands up, but I could be wrong, and there's nothing in the chat function. So I'll talk slowly as we go to the recommendations. The first one, 2.1, we're being asked to note the development of the changing model as set out in section C in the report. I presume we're happy to do that as a committee.
Yep, great.
Okay, thank you. At 2.2, we're agreeing to make a request to Finance Procurement Transformation for the allocation of resources. Now, I think what this committee is asking for, as Lillian said at the start, is we're asking for an 18-month funding for the 18-month period at the cost as set out, but we've also effectively included the 12 and 18-month figures for information. So we've accepted, I think it's up to Finance Procurement Transformation to make the decision based on what they have to determine. But as this committee, I feel that we should be asking for the 18-month period, but the case is in there for both 12 and 18-month periods, if that makes sense. So if members are with me on that, can we agree that, or is there anybody otherwise minded, if you like?
Stephen, can I come in? If we give people a choice, they'll take it. I'd be moving for 18 months.
I think that's what I'm saying. That's what we should move for. But obviously,
Yes.
The report that goes to Finance Procurement Transformation will have to set out the arguments for that committee to determine.
I think the point I'm getting at, Stephen, is if we agree 18 months today, Lillian's report to FPT will be for 18 months. Because if we give FPT a choice, there's a danger they could exercise their choice.
Well, okay. That's the first voice I've heard from the committee. And I've seen John Campbell in the chat there saying agreed 18 months. So I'm very happy to do that. I think I'm just trying to be balanced. But if that's what the committee's minded to do, then let's do that. Agreed?
Councillor Dempster's asking to speak, Chair.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Councillor Dempster. I see you there now. On you go.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that it might be unwise, because if we give them an all or nothing a decision to make, they may well decide to do nothing, whereas 12 months is an option that FPT might want to consider. So I would be happier to go with the officer's report as presented and give the two options, but make it clear in the request that our preference or our decided option is the 18 months. I'd just be afraid that you leave a committee an all or nothing shot, it might be nothing you get.
Yeah, I think you've done it more elegantly than what I tried to do at the start there, which is basically saying this committee wants 18 months, but the case is there for both in terms of balance. But I see Councillor Maitland's there in the chat as well.
Thanks, Chairman. I am in agreement with Jim. I think that's the way forward, and which is basically reflecting what you were suggesting in the beginning. I think I would leave it as it is, that the option is there, the preference is made clear.
Councillor Ferguson, and I know you've got some experience as a negotiator, but would that, I mean, are you happy to go with that in mind, given that we're making our preference clear that it's 18 months, but otherwise to go with the recommendations?
Stephen, I'm not wanting to go to a vote on this. I'm quite happy. At the end of the day, we'll just fight the case in FPT and make sure we get 18 months. Because at the end of the day, it is probably our highest council priority.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that then, I think what we're saying is that we go with the recommendations, but we make clear that our preference is for 18 months. Okay. Agreed. Thank you. And then at 2.3, we're agreeing to receive update reports. Obviously, we've touched on some of the detail that we would like to see in some of the working models in terms of what we get fed back. But can we agree 2.3 and we'll see the data as it comes to us as the working model develops?
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to next item, which is the Children and Families Recovery from COVID-19 Pandemic. Obviously, first of all, we're going to acknowledge the work that all the staff are doing across the service as this pandemic response rumbles on and on, but also to make a similar request to Finance, Procurement and Transformation, again for the 12 to 18 month period, and the cases set out in the report. And I think we have Stephen Morgan to speak to this, and obviously Lillian's here as well. So Stephen, do you want to add to this in the first instance? And obviously Lillian's there if she wants to come in to add anything that needs added.
Thank you, Chair. I think an acknowledgement of the previous conversation and debate around the single access point report reflects a lot of where we are across the whole of social work services at the moment. The pandemic has impacted on all of us massively, but it hasn't impacted on everyone equally. The most vulnerable have been hit harder by some of the impacts. That's certainly reflected in the data and the analysis that we've done across the service in relation to the people who we ordinarily work with having much more complex impacts from the pandemic, but also the newer people that we've never worked with before. Heather made reference to some of that in relation to shielding, but we've also seen families who otherwise hadn't had contact with social work, children, families, social work, now having contact with our services. So we've seen a significant increase. I'm going to jump slightly ahead of where I would have ordinarily introduced this paper to what happens after 18 months. We've tried to reflect in this paper that the picture right now is complex and it's not obviously predictable, but our experience of human nature is that we are remarkably resilient, and we would hope that many of the new people we're working with limited support over a shorter period of time may well not require the same level of input into the future. And our transformation journey that we started, which I think the report reflects the success we've had in terms of numbers of looked after children, for example, reducing because of the better quality of relationships and strength-based approach that we have, will stand us in good stead. So I'll stop there and I'll happily take any questions from the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, I'm yet to see any questions in the chat or any hands up, but Councillor Maitland has just come in.
So I'm quite happy to give way if anything else comes in first. What I was going to ask, Stephen, is whether or not our comparator councils are seeing the same level of need, same level coming through. What information have we got that is to be compared, please?
Yeah, I can respond to that. I'm a member of the Social Work Scotland Children and Family Standing Committee, and we discussed this at every meeting in terms of the increase that Scotland as a whole has seen throughout the pandemic, the pressures on lots of local services, but also on the national services that are around Council Maitland. So this increase is across the country as a whole. Our comparators are seeing similar increases. I think what's different about us, though, is we'd had that transformational journey where we were really pushing relationship-based practice. So our numbers were kind of going down, but then we've seen that possibly a steeper increase.
That's helpful, Chairman. Thank you. It's really to do with, because we put in a chunk of money into the children and families, the family support service, which I am absolutely 100% behind. But so you're suggesting that, well, I'm not absolutely certain what you are suggesting. You're suggesting it's going up faster because we put in that family support service. I'm sorry, I don't completely follow the logic.
Okay, what I would say, I'll try and make that a little bit clearer. We had been hugely successful around not just the family support funding that was around, but the change to relationship-based and strength-based practice using the signs of safety model. So our looked after children numbers had gone down because we'd had much more cooperation with the families, and you would only become a looked after child if you met certain criteria and there was a lack of cooperation. So that's why our kind of looked after children numbers were going down. Our general referrals have remained similar throughout that period. So I was a little bit clumsy in terms of the specific as opposed to the overall. So overall referrals have continued to increase, but the specific higher end social work intervention, which we try to reduce because it's more costly in terms of time and resource in the future, has reduced. So our kind of upward trajectory on that matter is likely to increase somewhat because of the effects of the pandemic. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. There is a sort of further point in terms of how the use of investment gets reported back as well, because obviously we have the intervention funding which we agreed at the last budget, which is obviously needed, and obviously events have sort of overtaken that a bit, and the demand is clearly sustained and sort of higher. So while we would be getting reporting back on the early intervention or sort of that kind of reporting, how will we keep track on how well we're doing with this? Because obviously we want it to have an impact. So it's really just about, do we need a 2.3, or is that something that we'll get as a matter of course? So it's really just to get a wee bit of clarity on that. I don't know if that's yourself or Lillian to pick that up. But
yeah, I'll come in and then Stephen can kind of come in and just confirm these details. Obviously, in terms of our early and effective intervention funding, we already have reported back to Social Work Committee, and we'll continue to do so as required within those parameters and timescales, particularly around this COVID challenge that we are all currently facing, and Stephen has articulated some of the challenges that we're facing, particularly around the newer families that we've never worked with before. So we are very closely monitoring their journey, and we are very closely looking at them through a different lens in a way, because we are starting very much that we have to do full assessment from the first time they make contact with you. So they have a different expectation from families that we've worked with before. So we're very clearly looking at the impact for those families, and as Stephen has indicated, we are hopeful that their own resilience and family supports and changing circumstances will come in. So we will be able to report separately if required, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Stephen. Stephen or Lillian, I'm just picking up the bits here where you've been using the staff from Cairn Ryan. I would suggest, they've been optimising their capabilities, I think is probably the best way of putting it. There was a question Kenny asked at our group meeting this morning. It was about children out of region. And I'm wondering here, is there any scope for looking at some of the high cost packages out of region as part of this process here, or is that a separate process?
If I could come in, Councillor Ferguson, then Stephen can give the exact details. So you'll know that we've worked extremely hard to bring our out of region care packages down for children who present challenging behaviour. We have had 5 emergency placements directly linked to COVID. So part of the work that we will do through this process dealing with the pandemic is work to get those 5 young people back to the region. And I'll let Stephen give an overview on some of the stuff the Kay and Ryan team have been undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, I'll start with the latter point about outer region placements first. Because Lillian's absolutely right. We monitor these extremely closely for 2 main reasons. One is the human cost to the children and young people who have been removed from the communities and the families, etc. And we need to make sure that whatever care and support that they get is absolutely right. And we've always got a longer term, or sometimes, well, a short term, a medium term, and a longer term goal, depending on the circumstances of those young people, to get them back to their own communities. And we do that consistently. That can be challenging, though, because when youngsters become settled in environments, they feel safe and secure, and they can make their own determination as to where they want to be. And the law around that is much strengthened now. But we do monitor those very, very closely. The point around Kay and Ryan staff, we were at a position at the start of the pandemic where the closure of the unit on a temporary basis was absolutely the right thing to do for various reasons. And as it happens, the skill set of those staff is tremendous, and we've utilised that to support some quite vulnerable families, particularly in the west of almost exclusively in the west of the region, actually. And we couldn't ignore the work that they've done. We're currently going through a consultation phase with the staff to see what the service looks like in the future. And clearly, once that consultation's finished, then a report with recommendations will be brought back to the committee. I hope that responds to the points.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Ferguson?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for the 2 of you. Right. Good answers.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. There's a couple of folk indicating in the chat that they've got pressure of another meeting coming up, so that's just acknowledged. But in terms of, we can go to the recommendations, I think, then. And at 2.1, acknowledge obviously we want to acknowledge and commend the work from staff who've had to sustain extreme levels of I suppose care and personal sacrifice across the delivery of this during the pandemic period. So I think we have to acknowledge that at 2.1. And then at 2.2, to agree to make the request again, our preference would be for the 18 months, but effectively agree the recommendations as set out in the report. And hopefully I speak for the committee when I say that, but can I get agreement on those 2?
Agreed.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your support, committee. And that takes us to the final paper. Or before I leave that, actually, in terms of reporting back, I think it would probably be responsible if they've got a way of reporting back and how best the impact on that additional spend, should FPT committee agree that, obviously, how we can sort of account for that. So if we can capture that either as an action or just as something we would do as a matter of fact, that would be helpful. The final paper is on the Grow Your Own programmes, and obviously this is something that we promote and support as a council generally, and we realise the benefit of people who are trained here tend to be retained here. So we've got a report in front of us. I think Heather's going to come back and join us to speak to this. So Heather, is there anything you'd like to add to this just now before we open up for questions?
No, nothing specific. I'm hoping that the report outlines really clearly sort of the background of this and how successful our current Grow Your Own programmes are, and hopefully as well the potential for us then to do more and to be more effective if we had adequate resources to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, over to members then. I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 questions or comments on this paper, although it's not appearing yet. Councillor Ferguson.
You're going to rely on me to come in a question on this one, Stephen. See Heather laughing there as well. Yeah, the only bit I'm worried about here is the MHO bit, and how do we tie them? Because we've been through this before, and then they get pinched away if somewhere else getting offered better deals. So how do we keep them here once we've got them trained? Is there a golden handcuffs or whatever you want to call it to them, or The basic grade train your own social worker, I'm comfortable with. I've known about it for a long time, and I've known about the MHO thing for a long time, and I've also been acutely aware in the past of, as I say, neighbouring authorities who are supposed to be our friends coming and stealing them.
Yeah, could I come in on that one, Chair?
Please do, and I'm sure Councillor Ferguson wasn't casting any aspersions on the moral direction of any of our neighbour authorities, but yes, no, please do.
Certainly the challenge from our south of the border authorities is significant. So without a doubt, Councillor Ferguson, this is an issue for us. What we really what I've asked HR to do is have a look at our structure for salary grades for social workers and MHOs. We are the second lowest in Scotland, so that remains a problem for us, and colleagues in human resource have agreed to do a bit of a review and a bit of work around that. So that is something that as a service we need to keep looking at. Where I would hope that we would be able to retain our mental health officers when we do find an opportunity to grow our own, to train them. They do tend to repay us with that commitment to the organisation. You can never say never, but we generally do have mental health officers that if you put the right training and support around them, then they will stay with us. We need to build in a bit more professional support, and certainly Heather and her team have been looking at that, and that is something that workers have told us both at exit interviews when they move on to another authority. That, along with the additional resource in terms of salary, can have an impact. So what we need to do is we need to try and future-proof our workforce. We need to do more with succession planning. We need to give a career pathway for our mental health officers, and all of that is a bit of work that we're currently trying to do. However, I would have to say there is a national shortage of mental health officers. There is a national shortage of social workers willing to become mental health officers. So this is not just a unique problem for Dumfries and Galloway, but we do have the unique problem of having the Ayrshires, the Lanarkshires, the Borders and Cumbria and Penrith and Carlisle on our doorstep, who unfortunately for us have a better salary band for our mental health officers. So we're looking at a holistic approach to say if we were able to grow more of our own mental health officers, we are asking at that point of application for a commitment of at least 2 to 3 years, and we would build that into part of the conditions for them to be funded throughout their training, and then we hope that we will give them such a positive experience and support around their practice that they'll want to stay with us. Happy if Heather may wish to come in and add something. Thank you.
Heather, do you want to come in with anything else, or is that what you would say?
Thanks, Chair. No, just very quickly, we just say we've already got an agreement with our student social workers in terms of for those that we put through the studentship and our expectations about staying with us. And we certainly, as Lillian's outlining, we would build that into the mental health officer programme going forward. So that wouldn't be a problem. But I would agree, we've tended to keep them and keep them well. I think the only bit at the minute for us has been, whilst there's been Scottish Government monies available to do the mental health officer training, we've been restricted in how much of it we could apply for, because actually we needed the resource, we needed the posts basically within the budget to be able to set that against them, really. You know, so it is the bit about, we want to sort of really push this in terms of if we can have the opportunities, because we know this will bring us real benefits going forward around not just our recruitment but our retention.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. I think that I'm just sort of curious about the 4-year training period in some periods. So I suppose that there's a sense of value about how long do we sort of encourage people to remain for as part of that 4-year investment, if you like, in some cases, and also is there how best do we deal with recurring costs? Because obviously we do this at the moment, and this is kind of to maybe improve the offer. But I think again, it's maybe there is a natural question that emerges about sustaining this, you know. So maybe if you could maybe help the committee understand that one as well, and then I'll bring in Councillor McKee.
Yeah, if I could just come back, the mental health officer, they have to already be qualified social workers, so their training to become a mental health officer is a year. It takes them to go through. It's an additional professional qualification. You're correct about the 4 years for the social workers. So we currently, they currently must provide us with a 2-year feedback in terms of time for the cost of us putting them through the social work degree, but we are considering whether we would look to increase that, and that would be a conversation we need to have a look at. We currently run the scheme, but obviously we are acutely aware, given we've got a shortage of recruitment and a shortage of retention of experienced and qualified social workers, we are going to have to do something around the succession planning. Heather may wish to add something to that, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian. Heather?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just to say that actually in terms of the 4-year degree, we tend to put people into the studentships either after the year 2, and we do year 2 and year 3 and year 4, so they will have done the first year themselves, supported it themselves, so they're already demonstrating their commitment to this because they'll have done the Open University modules that take them to a level where they can step in at year 2 or year 3, and that makes a huge difference for them, really. And I do think, we've never got a shortage of people wanting to do either of these qualifications. And particular, I think we see people who are native to the region, who are born and bred basically in the region, who want to stay. And we can track it back really clearly, whereby we've certainly got a senior manager at the minute, who came up through this route and is still with us and very committed to this region. And I think for me that's one of the winners here, is that these are people who don't want to leave the region, and if we're able to offer them this opportunity, then they will stay and they will give us really excellent service.
Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry, probably just as well. Thanks, Heather, for that. That puts it in perspective. Councillor McKee?
I think Heather and Lillian have touched on it, but going back quite a long time, there was we sought a guarantee from the applicants that they'd stay with us for 3 or 4 years after the training was complete. Does that still apply? And I appreciate what you're saying about the really happy at getting the chance to upgrade themselves, and it's been a worthwhile project. Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor McKee, it's currently 2 years, but we are looking at whether we can stretch that to 3 years return. But at this moment in time, it's a 2-year return for us funding their training. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. And Councillor Diggy Campbell to speak next.
Thanks, Chair. I was listening carefully to Lillian's response to Councillor Ferguson in terms of mental health officers being attracted to other authorities, and Lillian's comments on a request to HR to review that. I think it's critically important that HR look at this very, very seriously because of the clear increased demand that a region is under. And I don't know how other members of the committee feel that will be guided by you, Chair, in terms of how to respond. But is there anything that we can do as a committee to, if we're minded to do so, to support Lillian in our efforts to address that issue of competition from other authorities who offer higher grades or salary bandings, I should say?
Yeah, no, it's a point well made, and one that we've certainly spoken about before, and it's certainly a well known, I suppose, that there is that disparity, and I would certainly, as a committee, I'm sure we would want to support our Chief Social Work Officer in making that case. I think there's things that we can and can't do in terms of what the role of an elected member is or what the role of a committee is, but clearly HR will have to take a steer from this council and operate within the way, however they assess and come to these sort of figures. But Lillian, I don't know if, well, obviously, I'm sure you'll have the backing of the committee, but is there anything that you feel we could do in terms of supporting you in your role?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Campbell. I mean, I'm certainly happy to share with the Stuart Clanahan, who is leading on this for us, the committee's support, and he may wish some written confirmation or some minuted information to confirm that the committee support that piece of work being undertaken. Clearly, at the conclusion of that piece of work, then we will need to look at the options in terms of how we potentially could address that. So I'm happy to have a further conversation, or if members would like HR colleagues to attend a social work committee in the future to discuss that situation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be guided by the members here. So, Councillor Diggy Campbell, is that something that you think a HR attending a future meeting might help highlight the issue to them?
Yeah, I think that probably would be helpful. I mean, I would imagine that HR will be cautious in terms of the demands of other areas in the council who would want the grades to be reviewed. But I think, you know, the evidence is clear, and our social work services are on the front line, literally. And, you know, anything that undermines that delivery that is provided, you know, for example, through mental health officers, we need to do everything we can do to protect that service. So, yeah, perhaps maybe, Chair, you could have a discussion with Lillian and the best way to take that forward. But again, I'd be interested to hear what other members think. But I just want to find a way that we can do everything that we can do because of our sort of enhanced level of understanding as members of this committee that social work services are currently experiencing, and to effectively present a stronger case for them.
Okay, I'll certainly work. I mean, myself and the Vice Chair will be working with Lillian anyway, so there's maybe a form of words that we could come up with on behalf of the committee, so I can write as Chair and Vice Chair. We can put something write and circulate it to the members just to say we would like to support or endorse the case for parity, if you like, if such a thing is possible, and I'll get a form of words. I think that's certainly an action I can take. In terms of getting HR to a future committee, if members are so minded, obviously this is based on that assumption, then I think we can certainly invite them to come along at the appropriate spot in a committee agenda, and maybe hear from members of this committee, or where their input might be relevant to a particular report. And I'm sure we can discuss a way to do that in a sort of practical way going forward, if that's helpful.
Chair, if you didn't mind, I'll just come in.
Yes.
I think it would be worthwhile doing something like that, and at least it would show that we're supporting the staff. We're not just willing to sit back and accept the position they're in. We'll do our best to try and increase their pay control, if that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, nothing speaks louder than actions, I think, sometimes. So I think we'll try and find a way to take that forward, either as a letter and indeed an invitation to come to a future committee at the appropriate point in a report, if that's something you feel you could work in. Lillian, I don't know if you've got a way that could be kind of manufactured.
I'll certainly see what I can do, Chair. I'll work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I notice there's a couple of folk coming to leave for meetings at 3 o'clock. Councillor Ferguson, do you just want to come in on this one?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm finding it really difficult to keep which hat I'm wearing here. The problem we had the last time, and again this was predates Lillian, but Heather will remember, is that the MHOs had a multifunction, which when it came to the job evaluation scheme, they were down. They weren't upgraded like the other authorities. That might just be exactly where you've got the problem. Is that, and I think what we can do as a committee, Stephen, through you, would be share the willingness to upskill and to maybe. I think we made a conscious decision a few years ago not not to have dedicated doing nothing else but MHOs. So it was attached to other things they were doing. Now I'm not sure if that's still the case or not. So
no, absolutely not, Councillor Ferguson.
Right,
They're very, very specialist now. Thank you.
Well, no, I knew they were very specialist. That wasn't what I was getting at, but they were doing other social work duties at the same time. But if that's not the case now, then the job evaluation should sort that out, because that was the reason. Because I chaired the committee that actually heard that that job evaluation appeal, and that's how it didn't get the upgrade that they felt they should get. They were moved up a wee bit, but not as much as potentially others would be. So I'm only suggesting it's a way, Stephen, for you and Jock to take forward, is to say, look, we're wanting, as a committee, we're looking at the job evaluation here. So I actually think it'd be really valuable to let you and Jock and Lillian and Heather and team get into the bones of this, and then once you've done that, get HR to come and explain to us why they've come up with a particular grading. It's not the grading, it's the position on the scale. That's what I'm getting at, and that's the problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of expertise on this that I certainly do not have, and the thing is, I think what I'm trying to signal is that as a committee, collectively, I feel that we are happy to take an action that's appropriate to support anything that's going to help retain the staff that we need in this area to deal with the issues that we face. So, but the best way to do that, I will have to take advice, and this is where I think we'll have to have the conversation with Lily and Heather and the appropriate HR officers if need be, just so that we as a committee can both understand this going forward, what we can and can't do and what could be done or what solutions could be available if we hear HR speak to us at committee, for example, or at a seminar, and then working with Chief Social Work Officer and the respective officers, we can tread carefully and take into account all the sort of things that you maybe sort of highlighted as possible things to be careful of, and then find a way to go forward in a way that sets an action that does support our staff and in the appropriate way. So I think we're basically signalling an intent to act in support of staff in a way that will benefit this council in the wider sense, and just finding the best way to do that is the piece of work we have to do next. So it doesn't tread on the wrong toes or do anything that's sort of ultra vires or whatever the risks might be, because we have to let the proper processes happen as well, but just maybe let it be known that we want to support our staff as best as possible as a social work services committee. If that's
Stephen, can I very quickly come in with something?
Yes.
Same thing, just a different thing. It's really quite perverse that we train people to such a high standard that they're actually others are covetous and then come and look for them. So we're not celebrating. I think that's the point I'm getting at here. We should be celebrating the quality of what we do here, because of that quality, we're making the people who go through this process attractive to other organisations. They don't take them because they're nice folk. They take them because they're good at what they do and they've been well trained. And I think that's the bit I think we really need to hammer in here and to get that message across here. This has been a hugely successful scheme over a number of years, and we should be celebrating that, but taking it forward. And there has to be a way. I'm happy to leave that with you and Jock and the officers to take forward.
Okay. No, and I think that brings us nicely back to the report in front of us, which and I can see Councillor Maitland sort of in the chat just questioning about whether or not we might be wandering off our remit, which is completely appropriate, I think. So, but I think, yeah, we can take forward what we've heard at this committee in terms of how best to go forward on the basis of working with HR, for example, to support the service. But if we go to the recommendations in the actual paper, effectively we've been asked to firstly note the development and success of Grow Your Own programmes and obviously celebrate that, as you've highlighted, Councillor Ferguson. Are we happy to note that?
Happy to note.
Noted.
Okay, thank you. And then 2.2 is consider the investment in principle as set out in the report to support the two programmes and to improve recruitment and retention of staff. Happy to agree?
Agreed.
And then at 2.3 is to agree the request to Finance Procurement and Transformation to fund the development of 237,010 per annum and then it's the figures there, basically. So again, it'll be up to the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee to see that request and recommendation from this committee, should we decide to agree, and then they will determine that going forward. So we're happy to agree 2.3?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. And then as an action, I think myself and Councillor McKee will work with Lillian to sort of pour over the entrails of what's been said at this committee, I think, and find the best way to go forward that doesn't stray off our remit, as Councillor Maitland's pointed out in the chat, and also allows us to take an action that's meaningful and within our delegation, if you like, if that's okay with members.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further business for today, and I think we've covered what we needed to. So with that, thank you very much for your input today, and a safe onward journey. Bye for now.
Thank you.